That was not a good weekend for the Indiana Pacers. Their offense in the gutter right now. Two tough losses, two awful first quarters. What is going on? What is up with Tyrese Haliburton? And they made a contract move that makes a lot of sense. We'll talk about it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Monday. Hope you had a great weekend, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, if you had a great weekend, it probably wasn't because you enjoyed the Pacers' performances. They did not play particularly well. Some fun and interesting stuff from these games. Kendall Brown plays and gets his contract promoted. Jarris Walker has one of his best games of the season and plays a bunch of minutes. Pascal Siakam continues to look more comfortable to me. TJ McConnell had a career night. And none of that hardly will be talked about today because of the poo-poo that was the Pacers offense this weekend. 102 points against the New Orleans Pelicans, a team they beat 2 days prior, and 105 points against the holy cow Victor Wembanyama-led San Antonio Spurs, for a total of 207 points in 2 games for the Pacers. That is their lowest total over 2 games this season. We got to talk about their offensive struggles, the losses, Tyrese Haliburton's woes right now, and what's going into that. I have a different opinion on that than most people. And Kendall Brown, his contract situation. And we'll probably be talking contracts tomorrow, too. I bet they're going to sign a player today if you're listening on Monday. And I'll tell you why as we progress. We got to start with some games. And the offense, the first stat I said, again, 207 points in 2 games is the lowest 2-game total for the Pacers this season. They've been under 220 in a 2-game stretch 5 times this season. In fact, they've been under 225 for a 2-game stretch 5 times this season. They had 207 this weekend. They 209, their third and fourth game of the season. They had 213, that stretch that Haliburton was getting blitzed like crazy, and they were really struggling, which is noteworthy. We'll talk about why that's noteworthy in a second. They had 214 at the start of the road trip with everybody hurt, including Haliburton before the Siakam trade. That was that Denver, Utah, Pui games. And then 219, the first 2 games Siakam played without Haliburton against Phoenix and Denver. So if you'll note in that stretch, there was a stretch without Haliburton, the beginning of the season, and right when Haliburton was getting blitzed and struggling. And that is why I think the place to start with the Pacers' offensive struggles, this isn't the only thing, there's a lot that goes into this, is Tyrese Haliburton. He is not the only reason. He should not have a finger pointed at him for their offensive struggles because they tend to do better when he's out there just because of who he is and the attention that he commands in these games. But that was not as much the case this weekend, right? The Pelicans game, 0 for 7 for Haliburton from the field. His first scoreless game as a Pacer, 1 turnover, 3 assists. It was rough, right? It just was rough. They had a very nice bench night. They chipped into the lead in the second quarter. The bench did, but Haliburton didn't have a good game. And then against the Spurs, again, similar attention from the Spurs. He goes 4 for 16. He misses all his threes. Right this weekend, he was, I should have been quicker here, over 12 from deep. He had 8 assists, right? 6 rebounds. He found other ways to impact the game, 12 total points, but it didn't go particularly well. And so I have some opinions. One is we're seeing the coverage on him evolve. Herb Jones was a big part of his numbers against the Pelicans to me. But he's also missing a bunch of threes, right? Over 12 in his last 2 games is going to be part of this. But he's seeing attention in different ways. And so he is, as a team first guy, he wants to win. He is inclined to kind of figure out how he can get the team going before he thinks about getting himself going. And sometimes I think that's the right move. A lot of times Tyrese Haliburton has games like he had against the Pelicans in the win. 17 points, 13 assists. He's plus 11, right? His gravity's huge. His passing's great. They win, right? He's had a lot of those games of late. I actually was higher on his play right before the break and coming out, apparently, than a lot of people. But what's happening right now is he talked about this, and I wrote about this a little bit. After that first Pelicans game, they won. And Siakam was amazing. It was one of his best complete games as a Pacer. And they had a couple of those sequences I talked about on a podcast last week where Haliburton was the screener for Siakam. They would clear out the wings and try to clear the space. And Haliburton talked about it after the game, and he's like, yeah, I'm not as good at the ghost screen stuff as Buddy Hield, but I'm a good enough screener. And as one of our best shooters, maybe our best shooter, in fact, for my money, the best shooter on the team, except not this weekend, that kind of value can bend a defense and be valuable. So he is not doing as many pick and rolls. He's getting blitzed so much that it's hard anyway, but he's being used as a screener more. They're trying to open up their offense in a lot of other ways. Via Tyrese Haliburton as a screener, via Tyrese Haliburton off the ball with TJ McConnell handling it, right? You've seen Haliburton plus the bench groups a lot, especially at the end of first quarters. All stuff that at various times this season has worked, or at various times this season has looked like something that could work with continued reps and success and progress and all that. And I am on board with that as a long-term thing for the Pacers. I think the Pacers should be on board with thinking long-term. They have done that with their transactions, but it is very clunky right now, and how that is kind of making him play, making him look, especially when his shots aren't falling. I don't think he took any shots in this game against the Spurs where he was just 4 for 16 that I thought, oh, that's not a shot Tyrese Haliburton should take. And to his credit, he's earned the right to basically take any shot he wants with his play this season. They're just not going in, and that's bad. But there's more to it than that when, 3 assists against the Pelicans. That's not a Tyrese Haliburton number at all. That's among his lowest numbers, this whole season, right? That's so rare. Second worst of the season. So I think that he is the Pacers offense, right? He is the system. We've talked about this all season. He's talked about it. The Pacers talked about it. He's brilliant in transition. He's brilliant in the open floor. He's so good at the random action, reading the game, making adjustments that, that's why they're good in third quarters. That's why they're one of the best transition teams in the league. That's why their pace is high. That's why their offensive rating's high, because Tyrese Haliburton is good at all this stuff, right? When he isn't that guy, for a million reasons, they're working in other stuff with him. He isn't making shots. He's seeing more different coverages again. He's not running as many pick and rolls, all stuff that's happening right now, right? When he isn't able to be that guy for however many reasons all combined into one, that hurts the whole Pacers team. And that makes sense for them to try to say, well, if that's happening, let's try to unlock Siakam, who had, 21 efficient points and 8 rebounds against the Spurs and shot 50% and had 3 assists against the Pelicans and was awesome against the Pelicans last Wednesday. But at the same time, you're going to be taking lumps when Haliburton isn't Tyrese Haliburton, right? That is the Pacers' reality that they're dealing with during this streak right now, where they've lost 3 out of 4. Is that, Tyrese Haliburton had 9 points against the Raptors, 0 against the Pelicans, and I think I literally was just looking at it, 12 against the Spurs, right? That's low numbers for him. That is 21 points in 3 games. That's 7 points per game. This is a 20 and 12 automatic guy all season. Hasn't been there, right? That is the thing, number one, for the Pacers to get their offense back on track, is figuring out Tyrese Haliburton and his struggles right now, whether that's adjusting him back to a little more of what his role used to be, however they can get the ball zipping, however they can get him working more off the ball and still being a huge threat on the ball. Because right now, they're taking their lumps, and I get why, but it's not working. They are losing games they need to be winning. They're losing ground in a brace that they need to be trying to keep up in, and of course they know that, but the results aren't where they need to be. And the other part of this is, I just heard someone else kind of use this phrasing. Yeah, okay, it's a work in progress, like the Haliburton off the ball as a shooter screener kind of guy. I understand that, but a work in progress requires progress, right? And that hasn't been there yet. The Pelicans game showed some. This weekend, there wasn't as much. You didn't see it. So that is where, it's in the name, work in progress. You need to see the progress if you're the Pacers to continue to figure out how it evolves. And it hasn't been working, and they need it to, right? It's going to be a necessary dynamic of their game in the postseason if they make it and whatever their peak is. But this weekend, it hasn't been there. They played really bad. They also shot awful. 6 for 30 from deep against San Antonio, 10 for 32 against the Pelicans. That's not very good. They had 25 assists against the Pelicans. They only had 20 against the Spurs. That's dreadful, right? That is, for a team that leads the league in assists and has one of the best offenses in the league, that's dreadful. That's just not going to get them wins. And if you miss shots, you're going to have less assists. But even on games where they make few shots, to be clear, 20 assists is their fewest of the season, right? They made 40 shots in this game. They've had games 5 times, in fact, 6 times, where they've made fewer than 40 shots. But they had plenty of assists in those games. They had 34 assists in a game. They made 39 shots this season, right? It's not just that they missed. It's that the passing wasn't the same. Tyrese Haliburton wasn't the same. The 3-point accuracy wasn't the same. A lot of stuff they did against the Spurs, a lot, screams Pacers should win this game. Only 10 turnovers, 14 offensive rebounds. They got 30 attempts up. They shot well from the foul line, right? That's all great. Siakam had 21. Turner had a double-double. TJ McConnell, who's not going to get enough shine on today's show, was spectacular against the Spurs. 26 points, second best of his career. All this stuff should point to a win. They're playing the lowly Spurs, but they didn't have the offensive juice. 6 for 17 from Turner, 3 for 7 from Nembhard, 1 for 7 from Nesmith, 4 for 16 from Haliburton. Not enough zip, not enough Haliburton, not enough offense. That's a loss. Pelicans game. I mean, look, the Pelicans game, they got so smoked so fast that game changed dynamics so quickly. But, it's the same idea. 4 for 12 for Nembhard, 0 for 7 for Haliburton. Bench guys not making shots. They didn't shoot well. They had a lot of other stats. 17 offensive rebounds. That suggests that they could have been in that game. They weren't even close. Now, the Pelicans, that was ridiculous. We'll talk about that in a second. That was the craziest first quarter I've ever seen. But the offense for the Pacers, that's their thing, right? They didn't defend horribly against the Spurs at all. They didn't defend well, but 117, they should win that game every time. 129 against the Pelicans, yeah, they're going to lose, but they can be much closer. They can't score. The Pacers they're an offensive identity team, and you haven't seen that this weekend. It starts at the top with their star, but it's everybody. It's a lot of guys not making shots. It's a lot of the ball not popping. It's a lot of system error right now, and they've got to figure it out. They do not have a lot of time to be going through a stretch like this, and there's a lot of reasons why, but there's not a lot of time to have those reasons why. Their next 4 games are Dallas, Minnesota, Orlando, Oklahoma City. Dallas is an awesome team, and then that's 3 incredible defensive teams. They have got to figure it out, and they've got to do it now. And there's more to talk about. The Pacers' terrible first quarters this weekend, some other stuff from their games, and then pivoting to their contract move. Kendall Brown, congratulations. I feel bad that is not something that we'll be talking about more on today's show. Let's pivot to the Pacers' crummy first quarters that set the tone for their 2 losses this weekend. But first, we have to talk about the lovely folks over at FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150. That's a lot in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet on FanDuel. Again, any winning $5 bet, you get $150. Win that bet, bonus bets just for you. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with their quick bets or their exclusive props or their live in-game parlays. People love that. And plenty more. And again, you win a $5 bet, you get $150 in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com/lockdown for that offer and shoot your shot on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And we are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Pelicans. Hear from Jake Madison about what on earth happened Friday night in the first quarter. Brandon Ingram, holy moly. The whole Pelicans team, holy moly. The tone for these Pacers games, both of them this weekend, were set by some atrocious starts. Atrocious starts. On the Pelicans game, I actually think the one where they were down way more, their start was actually better, which is going to sound stupid. The Pacers scored 26 points that quarter. They were winning early in the game. If you watch this game, you know all this stuff, but just hearing the numbers again is just insane. 48 points in one quarter for the New Orleans Pelicans. They were 20 of 22 from the field. That's 90.9%. That's the highest first quarter field goal percentage by any NBA team since 2014. Whew, that's crazy. They didn't miss a 3. They didn't miss a foul shot. Oh, by the way, they had 2 offensive rebounds. If you notice, they had 2 misses. Every single shot the Pelicans took in the first quarter, they scored on that possession. And they only had 8 assists on 20 makes. That is where this was crazy to me. And that is why I think they actually played better in the Pelicans first quarter than the Spurs first quarter is. Yeah, the Pelicans created some open shots. I'm not going to say the Pacers defended well in a quarter. They gave up 48 points. Like, duh, they did not defend well enough. But holy moly, were some of those makes insanely impressive by the Pelicans. Brandon Ingram especially, who had 19 points on his own. But Herb Jones' only make was impressive. McConnell made some tough threes. They were deep as well. Trey Murphy's only shot was a deep 3. Alvarado's only made shot was tough. Like, they were some tough shots. Still, 48 points is insane, right? You've got to do something. You have to have a defensive rebound in a quarter, right? You just have. The Pacers had 7 assists on their 26 points compared to 48 and 8 for those same numbers for the Pelicans. You got to have more resistance than that. And again, some of it was just unstoppable, fluky nonsense, but that sets the tone for the rest of the game. This game, the Pelicans-Pacers game, was 7-7, right? Pascal Siakam tied it at 7 with 9:53 to go. Then early in the second quarter, 10:34 to go, it was 57-26. So that's less than a quarter of actual game time. The Pelicans went from tied to up 31. And then the Pacers won the rest of the game. They lost by 27. They outscored the Pelicans by 4 the remaining 35 minutes of basketball. And if you count the first minute, that's 36. For 3 quarters of time, the Pacers were better than the Pelicans. But they were so far behind early and so behind the ball. I mean, their second quarter was great that they couldn't keep up. They had to play from behind. They had to make decisions as a losing team. They had to be more aggressive with substitutions. Your mentality's changed, and they lost. And the start was a big part of it. They had to be better, both defensively and a little bit offensively, that game. They also had to be better in the first quarter against the Spurs. This time, it was their offense that completely failed them. The Spurs weren't even that great offensively. They only scored 26 points in the first quarter. This game ended about 3 hours ago for me. But the Pacers were woeful. I think Chris Teneri said on the broadcast, lowest scoring first quarter of the season for the Pacers, 16 points. The Spurs were fine. They had 5 turnovers, though. Pacers had lots of chances to do well in this quarter. They generated 12 threes. I would say 9-10 of them were very good looks. They made 1. It wasn't even about their process being so bad this time. They just made nothing. They made nothing from deep. They were good looks. They had to go from deep because Victor Wembanyama was so unbelievable in this game on both ends of the floor. And they had to make some threes. They did 6 for 30 from deep in the game. But they scored 16 points in the first quarter. 1 assist in the whole quarter for the Pacers. So it's the same idea. They lost this game. They should beat the Spurs. Everybody knows that. They lost by 12. They were down 12 right at the beginning. They were down 12 basically in the middle to late first quarter. For the rest of the game, from then on, same thing. They were the better team or just as good, whatever you want to say. Now, they should be better than the Spurs, not just as good, even over a 40-minute sample. This is not a woo silver lining Pacers moment. As it is for the Pelicans game, it's not for the Spurs game. But it is a sign that both of their games this weekend were lost in the first 12 minutes of play. They gave it away watching the Pelicans go bananas with one of the best first quarters I've ever seen. It was unbelievable. They could not be stopped. And then they gave it away Sunday with one of the worst their own first quarters I've ever seen. They couldn't score. They generated good shots. They did not make them to the point that it just looked weird. They just did not. They were not able to do it. They were not the Pacers. The Pacers score. This Pacers team scores points. They are not down 26-16 after any quarter. They're down 30-34. And so that should have been the first sign of system failure. It never really fired that night on their way to only 105. Granted, again, they shot horrible from deep, 6 for 30, with, again, largely good looks. Take out Myles Turner's 4 makes. They were 2 for 21 on non-Myles Turner 3-point shots. That is how bad they were against the Spurs. And yet, they still played them evenly. After, I'll find the exact point, they got up to a 12-point lead in the first quarter, just for the number. But it was just ridiculous that the Pacers gave 4:50 to go. It was 19-7. Oh, that was a later one. 2:54 to go in the first quarter. It was 23-11. So for the last 38 minutes, or 38 minutes, tie game. Completely tied. 39 minutes of play. The Pacers were just as good as the Spurs, which is not a compliment. They should be better than the Spurs. But their starts of these games put them behind the 8 ball. They're in a terrible position. Their mentality's wrong. They're playing from a position of deficit rather than a strength. You know, you make your rotation decisions differently. You're more aggressive with minutes for certain guys, and it changes everything. And it changed everything for them in a meaningful negative way. Their starts cost them both of these games. They have to be better to start games. They absolutely have to, even if it's for different reasons. And both of them, and their offense needs to be better because that was their 6th loss to the whatever you want to say. The 5 teams with below 30% win percentage this year are the Blazers, the Hornets, the Spurs, the Wizards, and the Pistons. The Pacers have 6 losses now against that crew. No other team has more than 5. The team with 5 is the Memphis Grizzlies, who are approaching joining this group and also beat the Pacers once. The Portland Trailblazers also have 5 losses. They're in this group. So not good. Not a good loss for the Pacers. Not a good weekend for the Pacers. I want to talk about the one bright spot from the weekend, TJ McConnell's play on Sunday, and then Kendall Brown getting his contract converted before we get you out of here. Plenty more to come on how TJ McConnell almost saved the day for the Pacers last night. But first, we must talk about the lovely folks over at PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. It's so easy to play. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 players and their stat projections and watch the winnings roll. And it's demon time on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into 1,000. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting ways to play on PrizePicks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins give you different payouts. And you can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. It is such a blast. It's such a simple way to play, too. Players and stat types you can select to include, like Steph Curry for more than or less than 29 points. Anthony Davis, more than or less than 2 blocks. Dame, more than or less than 4 threes. 2 to 6 players, just like that, roll in those winnings. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA. You'll get a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA with the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100 at PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And we're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, check out any of the teams that made a buyout move this weekend that are sort of relevant, like Muscala from the Detroit Pistons to the Oklahoma City Thunder, Shake Milton from the Pistons to the New York Knicks, Otto Porter not bought out, so Jazz, Pistons, Knicks, Locked On Thunder, any of those would be a good way to catch up on the transactional moves from the weekend. We'll talk about Kendall Brown and his transaction with the Pacers in just a moment. Hey, and if you listened last Friday, you already know because Eddie and I predicted that this could happen. We'll start with TJ McConnell. I don't want to skip over this. This deserves talking about. He was sensational. No one is like TJ McConnell in the NBA. Just nobody is like him. Against the Spurs, 26 points, 5 assists, which was actually second on the Pacers, 3 steals, 13 for 15 from the field. He was awesome. If they had won this game, he would have been why. He turned the tide so many times in this game where he was like, he had half their points in the first quarter. No one could stop him. The little fall away shot was there. Wembanyama didn't deter him. He would get into the paint, make the Spurs defense like turn around and figure out where the ball was. And then he'd get it to the right spot. He was awesome. He was absolutely sensational. 26 points is his second most in his career, only behind that crazy game in Milwaukee last year where he drilled 4 threes. Right? He was terrific. He was absolutely terrific in every way. And it just shows the value of paint penetration. Getting into the lane is so important in the NBA. Make a defense rotate. Make someone look at you from the opposite direction. Just make the defense move or react to you. Don't be reacting to the defense. Granted, you have to react to Victor Wembanyama, but in general, make a defense react to you instead of the other way around, and good things will happen. And TJ McConnell was doing that, right? He was getting into the paint. He was driving. He was creating shots for his teammates. He was fantastic. And had they won this game, he would have been the reason why. 26 is ridiculous for a guy like him. And it was almost all on those shots that he's just mastered. The mid-range little fall away 8 to 10 footers entering the day from 3 to 10 feet this season, 57.6%. That's a career high for him. Even on the 10 to 15 footers, he's actually below his career average. But he's just so money in the paint. He's good at the rim. He's such a unique player. There's no one like him. Nat Newell from the Indy Star came up with his stat, called it thrunks. People use stocks to do steals plus blocks. He used thrunks to do threes plus dunks, right? Very few players in the NBA who are short and don't do either of those things can be valuable. He's made 5 threes this season. I don't believe, yes, he has not dunked it, right? 5 total thrunks. It's very rare that a short player can be good with those stats. Like Ish Smith, kind of, but he's not even on a team anymore, right? Like it's very, very hard. Most guys with 0 threes who have some sort of value are bigs. They're tall. They aren't short or they don't play. McConnell is different. He is such an energy giver. He makes defenses react to him. He makes the Pacers offense get in motion. He's just a great player. And had they beaten the Spurs, he would have been the reason why. He was everything for the second unit. He was a positive plus minus for much of the game until the very, very last stretch he was in there when the Spurs put it away. Pacers were in 1 at 100-101 in the fourth quarter. And then Wembanyama came in and just was insane. Just to do a line about him, I watch a lot of the Spurs. This is probably like my 35th or something time watching the Spurs. 31, 12, 6, normal stats, 6 blocks and a steal, plus 19. He made 3 threes. He made an off the dribble 3. He made a step back 3. Victor Wembanyama is, I think, going to be the best player in the NBA, but by the end of 2025, that is my official take. He is just unbelievable. The way he can control the paint. Like, now his teammates don't foul anybody around the basket because he can just block the shot. And he reins in these threes and he's passing. He just drops the ball. It's ridiculous. Okay, the Pacers made a roster move as expected once the buyout market finished forming Friday. They were kind of on the clock, kind of not from that point on, because today, you're listening Monday, the 4th, is the deadline for teams to sign players to two-way contracts. So you have the option of signing one of your own guys to two ways that day. That goes away the very next day because then you can't backfill the spot. So over the weekend, the thought was, what are the Pacers going to do? Are they going to sign a buyout guy? Are they going to bring in a two-way guy from their own team and then fill that? Well, they chose option B. Again, something Eddie Garrison and I last Friday talked about as being an option that makes sense. Kendall Brown, the wing, an athletic wing. He is now going to be on the Pacers, as reported by Woj. I can confirm many of these details. 3-year deal for Kendall Brown, the final 2 years, non-guaranteed at his minimum salary. This year, a little bit of a bump over the minimum. Good for Kendall Brown. So reasons, things to know, and reasons this matters. Reason it matters, number one, their roster is now full. They have 15 players. Reason number two, this matters. By being not on a two-way deal, Kendall Brown can now play in the playoffs. Do I expect Kendall Brown to play in the playoffs? No. Should the Pacers plan to have Kendall Brown play in the playoffs? Absolutely not. But he couldn't have it all if they didn't do this. Now he can. That's an advantage to filling your 15th spot with a two-way guy, is if you know that the guy you're going to sign is not going to play in the playoffs anyway, you could just do something like this to have that advantage. A 3-year deal is nice for bird rights reasons, although they already had full bird rights on him after the end of next year. They could still cut him if someone else, for some reason, is available that would be playing for them. Like, let's say 2 important Pacers players get hurt and they need Daniel House. Okay, they could still cut Kendall Brown and his guaranteed now money and then get Daniel House, right? So there's no hindrances on what they can do otherwise. And now they have a day to assess their open two-way slot, right? Maybe they can promote a Mad Ant. Maybe they can go outside. It has to be someone, again, with a maximum of 3 years of service or less entering the current season. So they are limited on who it can be, but they do have an open two-way slot now. So I'd expect on tomorrow's show, the ending 5 minutes or so will be, here's who the Pacers have now on a two-way. If it's a Mad Ant, Kyle Mangus, Pedro Bradshaw have been the standouts of those guys. If it's not a Mad Ant, I got nothing. It could be any of a number of players. Oh, Mojave King, I suppose, if they wanted to do a 2-year two-way, since they drafted him last year in the draft and he's now playing and healthy for the Mad Ants. But yeah, Kendall Brown now with the Pacers tonight. He made his 13th NBA appearance, playing in the last 46 seconds against the Spurs. The thing about him was, remember, a lot of things here. Like, they traded away stuff, future assets, I think a pick and cash, to get him from the Timberwolves were on the clock at 48. They traded stuff to get him, right? And then that whole summer, I wasn't sure what they were going to do with his contract, whether that's a two-way, whether that's a fully guaranteed deal. And I think the fact that they never signed him before his rookie season until September kind of made me think, well, maybe they think they'll have roster spots because there was all those Lakers rumors and stuff. And then they signed him to a two-way, and then he got hurt in December. So he barely played for them after that summer league, but they still really liked him. Kevin Pritchard talked about that. They brought him back on another two-way, and he's been much better this year. He has been like doubled his scoring average in the G League. He's at like 17 points a game. He's still athletic. He makes half his shots. He moves the ball a lot better. He moves a lot better. He's a good defensive player because of his athleticism. Like, you can do worse than a 6'8", 20-year-old wing who's athletic as a guy to take a flyer on with your 15th roster spot. And he's gotten better. And you've had him and developed him for 2 years. And he's been around the Pacers a lot more of late. So congrats to Kendall Brown. Well earned for his development there. And we'll see if he plays more for the Pacers at all this season. Again, if they're healthy, I super doubt it. But now they have him. And then the other date to know is today. March 4th is the last day for a team to sign a two-way player. We will see. There's no reason not to. So I'm almost certain the Pacers will sign someone. The question is who? In-house, out-of-house, who knows? Who isn't eligible. But they have a team. Their roster's now full. They used part of the room exception to sign Brown. They still have the rest of it if they need to use it for some reason, although exceedingly unlikely. Almost certainly whoever they sign on the 4th, that's the last thing they'll do this season, and their team will be set for the rest of the year and if they make it, the playoffs. Lots to talk about. We'll look at a little bit at the standings tomorrow. I was going to start standings watch today if they won on Sunday because it's such a jumbled mess between 4 and 8, but not a good time to dive into the standings. We'll probably do a weekly glance at the standings going forward with so much jumble between now 4 and 8. The Pacers currently in 8th. We'll also be talking about the Mavs tomorrow. We'll be talking about whatever they do with their last roster thing. So much to talk about with this team, their offense, their direction, where they are. And we'll get to it all tomorrow. Probably only one guest this week, just given my life schedule and the Pacers schedule. So expect that on Thursday. And, of course, games to cover. They play the Mavs and Timberwolves this week. Hope you all had a wonderful weekend and enjoyed today's show. If you have questions, I am on Twitter at Tony R. East, and the show is there at Locked On Pacers, or comment down below on YouTube. Thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We will see you soon.